Hey, what's up guys? My name is Vince, a professional photographer and filmmaker. Thank you for joining me. Today, you're going to learn 75% of photography in less than 20 minutes. We are going to have an understanding of the three elements of the exposure triangle, and these are the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. The exposure triangle is the foundation for learning and understanding photography. Even your phone's camera utilizes these three elements, the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, and balances them to create an exposure. When shooting on auto mode, your camera makes the decision for you of how to balance the exposure triangle based on the photographic scene and the lighting condition. When you shoot on manual, you have the freedom and power to dial in the best settings for your camera in order to shoot a perfect portrait based on the lighting conditions you are shooting in and the effect you want to achieve in that particular scene. Let's break down the exposure triangle elements, and we're going to start with the ISO. ISO is the sensitivity of your camera sensor. The higher the ISO number, the more sensitive your sensor will be. The less the ISO number, the less sensitive to light your sensor will be. By the way, ISO is the big reason why cameras' body prices fluctuate drastically over a very short period of time. A cheaper camera body gets to around 800 and 1600 ISO before it starts to produce grain or noise in your photographs. Most expensive cameras gets up to around 3200 ISO, 6400, 10,000 and beyond, and still you will get a usable image. Like this one goes at around $2,700 here in Africa, and still you can get crispy sharp images at higher ISOs. It is among Nikon's top of the line cameras, and it is so amazing. It has low light capabilities, but this one is for the pros. If you're beginning out, I list down on the description box some of the best cameras that you can select while you're starting out. Like for instance, myself, I started with the Nikon D5300. It was such a wonderful camera. Then I went to the Nikon D750. By the way, the Nikon D750 is very good in low light. It also has very perfect capabilities when it comes to video. It's so nice. And so I upgraded from the Nikon D750 to this one, the Nikon D850. Now I'm using this one. This one is my go-to camera, and I've attached it with the 85mm f1.8 prime lens. This is a perfect combination for me since I love portraits that have a wonderful background, very sharp, very crisp, and portraits that have been separated from the background. So this is a very perfect body for such amazing portraits, and also even if you bump up the ISO, you'll still get very crisp and wonderful images. When I'm shooting outdoors where there's too much light or where there's bright light, I shoot at the lowest native ISO, which is around 100 ISO in most entry-level camera bodies. For instance, this one goes to around 64 ISO, and I've shot with it multiple times in that specific ISO, the lowest at around 64, and I've gotten amazing portraits in that low ISO setting. This is a very wonderful camera. You can also start with the Nikon D750. It goes up to around 100 ISO, and it also has some 2 settings below that one. This is a wonderful body for me, but to reach here I've grown over a period of time. So when you're starting, you can start with the Nikon D5300 if you love Nikon. There are also good options for Canon users and Sony. Actually, a camera is a tool that enables you to create a wonderful portrait. It's not the end game. The end game is your skill and how you know how to balance your settings, like the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. So guys, master these basic fundamentals of photography and grow yourself slowly, and you become better and bigger at your craft. Our camera is just a tool to guide you or to enable you to create an amazing portrait. By the end of the day, the knowledge that you have about your craft is the one that will determine the kind of portrait that you're going to produce. Not the body, but the knowledge that you have. In this particular episode, we're focusing on the three fundamentals of the exposure triangle, and these are the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. When I'm in the shade, I dial in ISO 200 or ISO 250 depending on the lighting conditions, and this particular setting enables me to create amazing portraits in that particular scene where there is shade. When I'm indoors, I dial in ISO 400, ISO 800, ISO 1600, sometimes 3200, depending on the lighting conditions in that specific scene. Some indoor spaces have bigger windows, hence allowing more light to penetrate inside, and in this particular case I shoot at around ISO 400 and ISO 800, and I get amazing portraits in that particular scene. A quick pro tip for you guys: keep your ISO as low as possible. If shooting in bright conditions, start with a minimum ISO like the ISO 100. Remember, ISO equals your camera's sensor sensitivity. Keep it low and use the aperture and shutter speed to compensate the exposure. The next element we are going to talk about is the aperture. Aperture, also known as f-stop, refers to the opening inside your lens. Your lens has blades that open and close, and that space between the blades is what we call the aperture. f1.8, the bigger the hole in between the blades, hence enabling more light to penetrate inside the lens. A quick rule of thumb for you guys: aperture is mainly used to control the depth of field. The lower the f-stop number, like for instance f2.8, the blurrier your background will be. The higher the f-stop number, like for instance f16, f14, f12, the more the background will be in focus. Depth of field simply means how much is in and out of focus. Aperture is the element responsible for the beautiful blurry backgrounds you see in professional photos. Pro tip: choose a lower f-stop number for blurrier backgrounds. f3.4 or f4 is a good starting point for beginners. For this particular lens, this is the 85mm f1.8. It opens wide open, hence allowing more light to penetrate inside the glass, and also it plays a very huge role in enabling me to isolate my portraits from the background, hence creating the beautiful, creamy and buttery, sweet, amazing blur that many people admire in my portraits. The third and final element that you're going to talk about today in the exposure triangle is the shutter speed. Shutter speed is the amount of time taken by the shutter to open, and it is measured or expressed in a fraction of a second. With shutter speed, you will see numbers like 1/50th of a second, 1/200th of a second, 1/800th of a second, etc. It goes all the way to 1/8000th of a second depending on your camera body and type. Like mine, the Nikon D850, it goes to around 1/8000th of a second, and I use this specific setting to freeze fast moving shots and subjects. You can also slow down your shutter speed to around 10 seconds, 30 seconds and so on. Shutter speed is very useful and it controls motion blur. Higher shutter speeds can be used in fast moving subjects, like for instance during sporting events like athletics or football. Slower shutter speeds can be used when you've placed your camera on a tripod, like this camera that is shooting, to eliminate motion blur. Slower shutter speeds can be used when you've placed the camera on a tripod to eliminate motion blur. This lower setting can be used to your advantage to create amazing landscape portraits of the star, the moon, and also waterfall. Personally, when I'm shooting portraits, I play around 1/200th of a second and 1/500th of a second. This way, I'm able to get amazing portraits that don't have motion blur. A quick pro tip for you guys: slower shutter speeds equals more motion blur. Faster shutter speeds equals less motion blur. So you'll want to shoot at higher shutter speeds for you to be able to capture crisp and sharp imagery. Rule of thumb: shoot at or above 1/125 of a second to get crisp and sharp portraits. We are now done with the 3 elements of the exposure triangle. Let's now take a quick recap of what we've learned today. Starting with ISO. Lower ISO equals darker exposure. Higher ISO equals brighter exposure. Simple. Lower ISO equals darker exposure. Higher ISO equals brighter exposure. Keep your ISO as low as possible, but raise it as needed when shooting in low light. Let's talk about the aperture. Lower f-stop number equal brighter exposure. Higher f-stop number equals darker exposure. Very simply, lower f-stop number equals brighter exposure. Higher f-stop number equals darker exposure. To achieve a blurry background, set your f-stop number as low as possible. For instance, f1.8, f2.8, f3.2, and so on. Use a lower f-stop number in low light to gather as more light as possible. A quick recap for the third and final element, which is the shutter speed. Lower shutter speed equals brighter exposure. A higher shutter speed equals darker exposure. Keep your shutter speed always above or at 1/125 of a second to avoid motion blur. A quick question for you guys. Which of these 3 elements of the exposure triangle did you find it difficult to understand? Please leave your answer in the comment section down below. For those starting out in photography or those who have been doing photography as a hobby and they want to upgrade to become professionals, you'll want to pick this lens. It's a prime lens. It's the Nikon 50mm f1.8, and there's also a similar lens for Canon users. I'll link it down below in the description. This is a very good lens. It's lightweight and it's very cheap. It goes for around $190 on platforms like B&H Photo or Amazon, and it's very unique. It goes to around 1.8 f-stop. It allows more light in, and also when you're using this portrait lens, while it's wide open at f1.8, you'll be able to isolate the background from the subject. Hence, you'll get that beautiful blurry background that you love in professional photographs. I hope you learned 1 or 2 things in this episode. I'm so happy to share my knowledge with you guys, and please continue smashing that like button and subscribing to this channel, because I'll be producing similar content each and every week for you guys to learn and to remind yourself of the important elements of photography and film and grow your craft into greater heights. So guys, I'm really happy and humbled to share my knowledge with you. Thank you so much for being part of this video. Please remember to subscribe to this channel right now, and I can't wait to see you again in the next video.